Hey guys, so we're looking at the brain with this lecture. Um, lot of vocab for this one. A lot of different parts of the brain you have to know to memorize. Um, Make sure you know what the different parts do. That could certainly be something that's asked on the AP test. What does this for? What does the thalamus? What part of that play? And so on. So make sure you're going back. You're looking at the book. You're doing the readings over again, and that chart that I gave you with different parts of the brain we filled out, make sure you refer to that um, as well. Okay, so we're looking at the structure of the brain. Um, the brain has the three main regions of it, and then we'll look at the lobes in the next slide. So, um, and kind of like peeling back the layers of evolution of our brains, essentially. So, the most kind of reptilian primitive portion of our brain is the hindbrain. All right, that's the part that actually connects to the brain stem. The medulla, the pons are on there, and the hindbrain basically controls our basic functions. So our heartbeat, our breathing, those vital functions that you need to live. That is what's controlled in the hindbrain. Okay, you're not doing your critical thinking. You're not doing speech and stuff with your hindbrain. That's the vital functions that are just keeping you alive. All right, and the cerebellum that keeps your balance as well. So kind of just your vital living functions are the hindbrain. Then you got the midbrain, which is kind of the connecting area between the forebrain and the hindbrain. Um, it's got your sensory functions, okay, your reticular um, formation in there. So this is kind of your communication pathway between the hindbrain and the forebrain. And then the forebrain is the newest, the most human portion of the brain. This is where your critical thought is. You got memory, you got emotion. Um, this is kind of where your thinking is going on. Okay, the cerebrum, the large portion of your brain. This is kind of what makes us human. All right, and then we have our two hemispheres and our four lobes. Okay, so we'll see a chart in a second. It's like the hindbrain, forebrain, or sorry, midbrain, and then forebrain, and then you have, if you take the brain and turn it sideways, you have the two hemispheres. Okay, so the two halves connected by the corpus callosum, which is that big band of nerve fibers that flow between the two. Um, so the left hemisphere, which again controls the right side of your brain, generally speaking, is where your verbal processing is happening, more responsible for language, speech, and so on. And the right hemisphere, which controls the left side of your body, is the nonverbal processing, the spatial, musical, the creativity, that kind of stuff. Okay, and then you got your brain. You can turn sideways again. You got the four lobes. Okay, frontal lobe is pretty easy at the front. That's your more critical thinking, the executive control system. So your critical analysis stuff happening up here. Okay, you have your parietal lobe, which is your sensory lobe right here. Your temporal lobe, which is your auditory, and your occipital lobe in the back there. That's where your vision center is. Okay, now an aphasia is um, some sort of brain injury or sort of like at language in the brain, some sort of brain damage that's happened specifically. Okay, that it interrupts your ability to articulate or understand language. So for speaking and listening. Okay, so the Broca's area, remember Boca, mouth, Broca, speech production is this green portion of the brain right here. Okay, and Wernicke's area, or Wernicke's area, excuse me, plays a role in understanding speech. So this is, in your temporal lobe for listening, understanding speech, and then creating speech, actually talking and producing language and stuff happening here in your Broca's area. So again, looking at our main structures. Okay, we'd have, it's not, yeah, it's not on this. But you'd have your occipital lobe here, your parietal lobe up here, your temporal lobe, and then your frontal lobe. Okay, obviously this is a side view, so you can't see the left and right hemisphere, but you guys kind of got that. This does show, so you got your hind brain here, connecting to your brain stem, going down into your central nervous system. You got your midbrain here, and then you got your forebrain, okay, which is the most evolved part. Corpus callosum, that band of fibers connecting the two hemispheres right there in the middle. Okay, you got your pituitary, so that's your master gland for the endocrine system that we just talked about, that controls the release of hormones and stuff for various purposes. Uh, the hindbrain again, mostly responsible for just your basic functioning, the things keeping you alive, and then this more kind of a more advanced things, again, emotion, memory, the endocrine system and all that kind of stuff being controlled here by the forebrain. All right. Now, how much of your brain do you actually use? Well, pretty much all of it. Not necessarily at one time, though. That old, we only use 10% of our brains thing is just completely unfounded. And, if you can unlock, that one movie, I can't think what it's called, but, where she, takes the pills and she unlocks all of her brain and has, psychic powers or whatever. We all use all of our brain in different areas, at different times, okay? And most of our brain is what they call association areas. So there's no necessarily one specific task assigned to it. It basically helps with the other tasks that are necessary. Okay, so whatever is happening, whatever stimuli, you're taking in and performing some sort of behavior because of it. And we'll see the imaging in just a second. But different parts of your brain will fire as different tasks are required. So humans have a lot more association area. We're able to carry out much more complicated tasks because we don't have so much of our brain already that's solely committed to keeping you alive and your fight or flight response or whatever. We have a lot of extra brain that can help with all these various tasks, like a bigger support system. And again, going back to the beginning of psychology, we got the structuralists and the functionalists, and they're like, "Hey, man, what's going on in the brain? Why are we behaving the way we are? Why do we think certain things and feel certain things?" And they couldn't see. The only way they had to try to figure out what's going on inside the brain is introspection, which is not reliable in the slightest, and so, looking at the brain was dismissed. What's the point? We can't know exactly what's going on in there. So we focus on behavior because those things are overt. Well, now we're capable with technology of doing things that functionalists and structuralists only dream of. Now we can look at the brain, okay, using a variety of different techniques, measuring the brain waves, okay, destroying part of a brain, and this would obviously be done on more animals and stuff. We take out the hypothalamus of a rat, and so what happens? How does that affect how they live? And there's a lot of examples in the book it talks about of them doing stuff like that, and how effect it had on these animals. Electrical stimulation. Remember that video we watched in class of the brain surgery, where the person was awake and they were trying to talk and they were poking different parts of the brain and oh, now I can actually say the word and stuff. And then the brain imaging, looking, a CT scan, probably most familiar with, or MRI, so we'll be able to look, put someone in a machine and then ask them various questions or whatever, or give them, math problems to solve, or give them human faces to look at, or whatever you're trying to research, and you actually see the parts of the brain firing up, and actually see oh, hey, this area is firing when this stimuli is presented, and so on. So we're capable of doing things now that the psychologists of the past could only dream about. Who knows what Freud would have thought or whatever if we had this kind of imaging available to him. So Where it used to be, behavioralism was the dominant field of psychology forever, and it still is, but now cognition is a big part of it too. Okay, psychologists are mostly behavioralist cognition because we can see the brain, we can see what's happening, we can actually have data to work on. When the person is showing this face, this area keeps firing over and over and over and over and over again. Like that's the results, and we can actually see this happening in real time. Um, so now it's no longer kind of laughed at. Like now this is a legit, actual scientific field of psychology because we have this brain research available to us. Okay, so CT scans, looking at different areas. We can make, oops, um, we can make determinations by that. Okay, looking for things like schizophrenia. All right, so looking at the brain ventricles. So as you can see here, people who have schizophrenia, often those show up as much larger than people who do not. So we can use brain imaging to actually diagnose now, to help in diagnosing certain conditions, and then doing the appropriate treatment of that. So it can aid in clinical diagnosis for a psychologist, and now obviously other medical professionals as well. Okay, plasticity of the brain. The brain is amazing. Um, the Phineas Gage story, the one video we watched of the girl who had the entire, I think it was the left lobe, I forget which lobe it was, but one half of her brain was removed, and she's still able to function, like with a few exceptions, almost completely normal. Um, so the brain is amazingly able to adjust and bend and reorganize as is necessary. Um, when there's damage, when there's some sort of trauma or whatever, it's able to mold itself to still function at as high of a capacity as it possibly can. Okay, and then we got mirror neurons as well, which are much more recent kind of discovery. Um, that when we observe other people doing certain actions, certain parts of the brains fire off, and that help us in our ability to imitate and to be empathetic and understand. We're amazing at reading faces and the emotion on faces and stuff, and those mirror neurons might be a big part of that, of allowing us to see the faces and see the emotions on there and immediately kind of like understand what's going on there. Okay, so these are the major portions of the brain. Um, make sure you know what those areas are. Make sure you know what they're responsible for. Um, we got about a month left until the test, so make sure you guys are starting to kind of looking to hit it. You know, studying short amounts of time every day if possible, looking at the books, reading through stuff, looking at those end of chapter reviews they have and kind of quizzing yourself. About a month out, so now is the time to really start kind of getting into it and hitting the nitty gritty. And as always, let me know if you guys got any questions.